Good morning. Good morning, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Let's see who we have this morning. Let's see who we have. Just waiting for everyone to join us this morning. Good morning, Isabel and Christina. Good morning, Isabel. Good morning, Frankie, if you're watching. Good morning, Petra. Good morning, Tyler. Good morning, Noemi. Let's wait for the rest of our usuals to join us. It's a bit of a lazy day today. I've noticed that lots of people who usually watch this morning were not watching, so maybe people are having a bit of a lie-in this morning. Good morning, Camille. Good morning, Eleonora. What do you think? Do you think today's a bit of a lazy day? Thank you, Eleonora. I was going to say, you're probably wondering, there's something weird or different about Miss Lopez, and it's I washed my hair this morning and I've left it curly for today. So that's what's weird about Miss Lopez today. I've got crazy hair. Good morning, Zoe. Thank you. Good morning, Charlotte and Emily, if you're watching. Yes, it's a little bit different, but I thought I'd leave my natural hair and look after it. Often when I go into school with my curly hair, lots of people say, "Whoa, what's that crazy hair?" Oh, you went to the park. Oh, super. Well done, Naomi. Did you go and do some exercise? Thank you, Zoe. Noemi, you are making me laugh. Noemi is saying that she can relate because she always has crazy hair. Oh, you did yoga, Eleanor. I'm so jealous. Good morning, Casey. I'm going to do some yoga probably this afternoon. After I finish this, I'm going to try and go for a run, and then I'm going to do Joe Wicks and then some yoga this evening. Does that sound a bit crazy? Well, I'm a bit crazy. Charlotte. Good morning, Anthony and Isabella. Okay, so people are asking what book we're going to read. So I have decided to read. Oh, pardon me. How many chapters do we have? I've decided to read The Twits because it's a nice short one for our story time for the next week, and then I am going to. I've chosen another book for when we're back to school to do some like English and spag lessons on. Okay, and it isn't a Roald Dahl book; it's a different book. I'm just going to have a little read of it over the next few days just to check that it's suitable for year 3, 4, 5, and 6 because it's definitely suitable for year 5 and 6. But I just need to check for year 3 and 4. Oh, you and your brother are on different devices. Good morning, Dominic. The Twits. So we're going to read The Twits. Just letting everyone join, giving people some time because sometimes people are a bit busy and then they say, "Oh, it's 11 o'clock. I need to go and watch story time." Good morning. Good morning. I love The Twits. Do you know what I love? Good morning, Isabella. I love all the Roald Dahl books. I just love them. I really love them. If I could read them all, I'd read them all. But maybe some people want to try something different. And I thought maybe because some people said they wanted picture books, maybe from next week I will read you a little picture book at the beginning of our story time. Yeah, so you get a picture book, a chapter book, and a poem a day. Does that sound good? Yeah? Okay, so let's go for our poem for today. A poem a day. Super Charlotte going to read along with me. I wish I could have you reading, because that's what we used to do in school. Do you remember? You could help me with the reading. But actually, I don't mind, because after I'm done reading with you guys, I don't read aloud for the rest of the day. Okay, let's have a look at our poem for today. Conversation Piece by Gareth Owen. Late again, Blenkinsop? What's the excuse this time? Not my fault, sir. Whose fault is it then? Grandma, sir. What did she do? She died, sir. Died? She's seriously dead, all right, sir. That makes 4 grandmothers this term, and all on PE days, Blenkinsop. I know, it's very upsetting, sir. How many grandmas have you got, Blenkinsop? Grandma, sirs? Grandma, sir? None, sir. None? All dead, sir. What about yesterday, Blenkinsop? What about yesterday, sir? You missed maths. That was the dentist, sir. The dentist died. No, sir, my teeth, sir. You missed the test, Blenkinsop. I'd been looking forward to it, sir. Right, line up for PE. Can't, sir. No such word as can't. Why can't you? No kit, sir. Where is it? Home, sir. What's it doing at home? Not iron, sir. Couldn't you iron it? Can't do it, sir. Why not? My hand, sir. Who usually does it? Grandma, sir. Why couldn't she do it? Dead, sir. And that's by Gareth Owen. Lots of excuses in that one. Good morning, Athena. Nice to see that you've joined. Good morning, good morning. Isabella, I'm drinking coffee. One of my favorite thing to have. Anyone who knows Miss Lopez knows she loves coffee. But I only have one a day. Okay, so we are going to be reading The Twits by Roald Dahl. So, any predictions on what this book might be about if you haven't read it? If you've read it, I don't want to know. If you haven't read it, please have a look. Good morning, James. Nice to see you watching. What do you think it might be about? Do you know, the front picture doesn't really show us much on this book. Just shows a man on a ladder. So it could be about anything. It could be about a painter. It could be about a painter and his monkey. So it could be about people playing pranks. Yeah, it doesn't really, this front cover is not really necessarily the best. But then on the back, they've got both Mr. and Mrs. Twit. So that tells us a little bit more. So it might be about Mr. and Mrs. Twit and their adventures. And I think we've got everybody now, so I think we can start. So we've got our regulars, our little private school class. There's about 20 of you, which is a perfect number. Right, let's start. The Twits. Introducing Mr. Twit, Mrs. Twit, the roly-poly bird, and the muggle-wump monkeys. Those are our characters in this book. If you've got it and you want to read along, you can be my guest. Please do. And actually, I just said be my guest because I watched Beauty and the Beast last night and it's in my head. Be our guest, be our guest. And I think maybe you're probably wondering why my slip is a bit crazy today. I think it's maybe the hair. I think the hair makes me a little bit crazy. But all fun and games. Hairy faces. Thank you, Charlotte. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their face, it must be as big a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. Yeah, that's a job. So what I want to know is, how often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us, on Sunday nights? And do they shampoo it? Do they hair dry? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in to stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to the barber to have their hairy faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with nail scissors? I don't know. But next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the streets, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. Mr. Twit. Oh. Mr. Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes, and his nose, was covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and ear holes. Mr. Twit felt that his hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand, but in truth he was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60, he was a bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck out straight like bristles of a nail brush. That's fine. Good morning, James and William. We are reading the twits. We've just started. Lovely of you to join us. And how often did Mr. Twit wash his bristly nail brushy face of his? The answer is never, not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. Blech. Dirty bits. As you know, an ordinary, unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it's not washed often enough, and there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially foods. Things like gravy go right in among the hairs and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel and we quickly look more or less all right, but the hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces, but not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on his hairs. Mr. Twit didn't bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfasts, lunches, and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you look closely, not that you'd ever want to, you would see tiny specks of dried up scrambled egg stuck to his hair, and spinach, and tomato ketchup, and fish fingers, and minced chicken livers, and all the other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. Oh, disgusting. If you looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen. If you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hands. Things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese or a mouldy old cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tinned sardine. Because of all of this, Mr. Twit never went really hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. Ooh. What I am trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul, smelly old man. He was an extremely horrid old man, as you will find out in a minute. Yes, I can say happy birthday to you. James, why are you having breakfast and listening to the Twit? That's not a good combination. Mrs. Twit. Mrs. Twit was no better than her husband. She did not, of course, have a hairy face. It was a pity she didn't, because that, at any rate, would have hidden some of her fearful ugliness. Take a look at her. ever seen a woman with an uglier face than this? I doubt it. But the funny thing is that Mrs. Twit was born ugly. She wasn't born ugly, sorry. She hadn't quite a nice face when she was young. The ugliness had grown upon her year by year as she got older. This is one of my favourite quotes ever in any book, so listen up. Why would that happen? I'll tell you why, and I think this is very true. If a person has ugly thoughts, it begins to show on the face. And when that person has ugly thoughts every day, every week, every year, the face gets uglier and uglier until it gets so ugly you can hardly bear to look at it. A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth, but if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams and you will always look lovely. And I completely agree with that. If you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams and you will always look lovely. I really believe that quote. Nothing shone out of Mrs. Twit's face. In her right hand, she carried a walking stick. She used to tell people that this was because she had warts growing out on the sole of her left foot and walking was painful. But the real reason she carried a stick was so that she could hit things with it. Things like dogs and cats and small children. And then there was the glass eye. Mrs. Twit had a glass eye that was always looking the other way. That is a great quote, Eleanor, isn't it? The glass eye. You can play a lot of tricks with a glass eye because you can take it out and pop it back in again anytime you like. You can bet your life Mrs. Twit knew all the tricks. One morning, she took out her glass eye and dropped it into Mr. Twit's mug of beer when he wasn't looking. Mr. Twit sat there drinking the beer slowly. The froth made a white ring on the hairs around his mouth. He wiped the white froth onto his sleeve and wiped his sleeve on his trouser. You're plotting something, Mrs. Twit said, keeping her back turned so he wouldn't see that she had taken out her glass eye. Whenever you go all quiet like that, I know very well you're plotting something. Mrs. Twit was right. Mr. Twit was plotting away like mad. He was trying to think up a really nasty trick he could play on his wife that day. You'd better be careful, Mrs. Twit said, because when I see you starting to plot, I watch you like a wombat. Oh, do shut up, you old hag, Mr. Twit said. He went on drinking his beer, and his evil mind kept working away on the latest horrid trick he was going to play on the old woman. Suddenly, as Mr. Twit tipped the last drop of beer down his throat, he caught sight of Mrs. Twit's awful glass eye staring up at him from the bottom of the mug. It made him jump. I told you I was watching you, cackled Mrs. Twit. I've got eyes everywhere, so you'd better be careful. The frog. To pay her back for the glass eye in his beer, Mr. Twit decided he would put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. He caught a big one down by the pond and carried it secretly in a box. That night, when Mrs. Twit was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Mr. Twit slipped the frog between her sheets. Then he got into his own bed and waited for the fun to begin. Good morning. Is it Maya? Good morning, Maya. We're reading The Twits, and we are on, it's like the third chapter. So it's about these two horrible people, Mrs. and Mr. Twit, and they like playing tricks on each other. We chose a short book to get through over the Easter holidays, and then we're going to read a longer chapter book and do some lessons when we come back from the Easter holidays. Mrs. Twit came back and climbed into her bed and put on the light. She lay there in the tummy. Her tummy was itchy. Dirty old hags like her always have itchy tummies. Then all at once she felt something cold and slimy crawling over her feet. She screamed. What's the matter with you, Mr. Twit said. What's the matter with you, Mr. Twit said. Help! Screamed Mrs. Twit, bouncing about. There's something in my bed. I'll bet it's a giant skillywiggler. Skillywiggler I saw on the floor just now, Mr. Twit said. That what? Screamed Mrs. Twit. I tried to kill it, but it got away, Mr. Twit said. It's got teeth like screwdrivers. Help! Screamed Mrs. Twit. Save me, it's all over my feet. It'll bite off your toes, said Mr. Twit. Mrs. Twit fainted. Mr. Twit got out of bed and fetched a jug of cold water. He poured the water over Mrs. Twit's head to revive her. The frog crawled up from under the sheets to get near the water. It started jumping about on the pillow. Frogs love water. This one was having a good time. Oh. When Mrs. Twit came to, the frog had just jumped onto her face. This is not a nice thing to happen to anyone in bed at night. She screamed again. By golly, it is a giant skillywiggler, Mr. Twit said. It'll bite off your nose. Mrs. Twit leapt out of bed and flew downstairs and spent the night on the sofa. The frog went to sleep on her pillow. Good morning, Ava and Jack. Nice of you to join us. We're reading the Twits. We're going to read a short, I just explained, but we're going to read a short book for the holidays. The Wormy Spaghetti. The next day, to pay Mr. Twit back for the frog trick, Mrs. Twit sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms. She chose big, long ones and put them in a tin and carried the tin back to the house under her apron. Good morning, Finley. At 1 o'clock, she cooked spaghetti for lunch and she mixed the worms in with the spaghetti, but only her husband's plate. The worms didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled with cheese. Hey, my spaghetti's moving, cried Mr. Twit, poking around in it with his fork. It's a new kind, Mrs. Twit said, taking a mouthful from her own plate, which of course had no worms. It's called squiggly spaghetti. It's delicious. Eat it up while it's nice and hot. Mr. Twit started eating, twisting the long tomato-covered strings around his them into his mouth. Soon there was tomato sauce all over his hairy chin. It's not as good as the ordinary kind, he said, talking with his mouth full. It's too squishy. I find it very tasty, Mrs. Twit said. She was watching him from the other end of the table. It gave her great pleasure to watch him eating worms. I find it rather bitter, Mr. Twit said. It's got a distinctly bitter flavour. Buy the other kind next time. Oh. Mrs. Twit waited until Mr. Twit had eaten the whole plateful. Then she said, You want to know why your spaghetti was squishy? Mr. Twit wiped tomato sauce from his beard with a corner of the tablecloth. Why, he said. And why it had a nasty, bitter taste? Why, he said. Because it was worms, cried Mrs. Twit, clapping her hands and stomping her feet on the floor and rocking with horrible laughter. They're horrible to each other. Is it blurry? It might be my connection. Should I stop and reopen? Yeah? Sorry guys, my Instagram just gone a bit funny, so I'm going to reopen it for everyone. So unpleasant. We can have a little chat while my Instagram starts up again. They are so horrible to each other. What do we think about Mr. and Mrs. Twit? They are horrific to each other. They are just not very nice to each other. They like to play tricks on each other. They're very unpleasant. What else do we think about them? Is that better now? Is the connection back? We'll read a couple more pages if the connection is back. Give me a thumbs up if you can see me now. They're evil. Yes, they are an evil couple. They're horrible. Yeah, they are definitely horrible. Can we think of any oh my gosh, I need to go back to school. Super, you can see me now. Any, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me. especially if you're in my class. Why is it not coming to my mind? Synonyms. Do you have any synonyms for horrible? Yuck. Imagine eating worms. I can't imagine, Isabel, and I don't want to imagine. Synonyms. Despicable. Well done. Terrifying. Ghastly. Fantastic. Look at all those words. I'll just wait till I have everyone back on. Malicious, atrocious, outrageous, revolting. What super words? Read one more before we go today. The funny walking stick. To pay Mrs. Twit back for the worms in his spaghetti, Mr. Twit thought up a really clever, nasty trick. One night, when the old woman was asleep, he crept out of bed and took her walking stick downstairs to his workshop. There, he stuck a tiny round piece of wood, no thicker than a penny, onto the bottom of the stick. This made the stick longer, but the difference was so small the next morning Mrs. Twit didn't notice it. The following night, Mr. Twit stuck on another tiny piece of wood. Every night he crept downstairs and added an extra tiny thickness of wood to the end of the walking stick. He did it very neatly so that every extra bit looked like part of the old stick. Gradually, oh so gradually, very slowly, it is impossible to notice it. Mrs. Twit's walking stick was getting longer and longer. Now, when something is growing very slowly, it is almost impossible to notice it is happening. You yourself, for example, are actually growing taller and taller every day that goes by, but you wouldn't think of it, would you? It's happening so slowly you can't even notice it from one week to the next. It was the same for Mrs. Twit's walking stick. It was all so slow and gradual that she didn't notice how long it was getting, even when it was halfway up to her shoulder. That stick's too long for you, Mr. Twit said to her one day. Why, so it is, Mrs. Twit said, looking at her stick. I had a feeling there was something wrong, but I couldn't for the life of me think of what it was. There's something wrong, all right, Mr. Twit said, beginning to enjoy himself. What can have happened, Mrs. Twit said, staring at her old walking stick. It must suddenly have grown longer. Don't be a fool, Mr. Twit said. How can a walking stick possibly grow longer? It's made of dead wood, isn't it? Dead wood can't grow. Then what on earth has happened? Cried Mrs. Twit. It's not the stick, it's you, said Mr. Twit, grinning horribly. It's you that's getting shorter. I've been noticing it for some time now. That's not true, cried Mrs. Twit. You're shrinking, woman, said Mr. Twit. It's not possible. Oh, yes, it jolly well is, said Mr. Twit. You're shrinking fast. You're shrinking dangerously fast. Why, you must have shrunk at least a foot in the last few days. Never, she cried. Of course you have. Take a look at your stick, you old goat, and see how much you've shrunk in comparison. You've got the shrinks. That's what you've got. You've got the dreaded shrinks. Mrs. Twit began to feel so trembly she had to sit down. And he's convinced her to think that she's shrinking. How horrid is he? They are so horrid to each other. And that was our first few chapters of our new book for today, The Twits. So I hope you enjoyed. And if you are looking for a task to do after our reading today, you could write. You could write a description of the Twits. So I'll show you one more picture of them. Oh, that's them upside down. Or you can look up a picture of them and you can write a description of them. Okay? Yeah, it is good so far. It's funny for us because it's not happening to us, but they are horrible to each other. Hopefully tomorrow our connection will be better on Instagram. I know that there were a few problems anyway in general with Instagram the last couple of days. If you'd rather join in through YouTube, it's definitely a better connection on YouTube. YouTube is much better. Thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed. And just a reminder that tomorrow we decided that we are going to do story time tomorrow, and we are going to do pajama day Friday tomorrow. So we're going to do our reading in our pajamas tomorrow. Okay? Yeah? Only if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. Yeah? So some of you probably are still watching in your pajamas, and that's fine. Everyone is different. Or some of you might want to wake up, get ready, and change into a different type of pajama. Okay, you might want to wear a onesie or something like that. Good morning, Rosie. We've just started reading the twits. So after I finish this video, if you go back, you can watch us reading. Thank you for joining this morning. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Remember, we've got Spanish at 2 o'clock if you'd like to join. My mum and I are doing Spanish at 2 o'clock. And today we'll be looking at months of the year and the weather. So see you tomorrow at 11 o'clock, or see you later at 2 o'clock for Spanish. Ciao. Hasta luego. I'm going to say bye to my YouTube. Hasta luego. Adios. Ciao. Bye, guys. Have a lovely rest of the day. Lots of love and lots of positive energy from Curly Miss Lopez. See you later. Where do I end?